Hey everybody, my name's Pete, and you are joining us in the middle of a series that we're calling How to Start a Revolution, where we're walking through the book of Acts. And the book of Acts, if you don't know, is kind of the accounts of the early church. It's the accounts of the first followers of Jesus and what they do after his resurrection and ascension, how they begin this movement that eventually turns the world upside down, or you could say turns the world right side up. And today we're gonna go to Acts chapter 18. It says, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. If you want to know what after this is, check out last week's message. But after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. Because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome, Paul went to see them. And because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. This is a really interesting just little side note that Paul has like a skill that he does on the side. He knows how to make tents, or he knows how to do something involved with making tents or shelters of some kind. And so while he's there, he gets to the city ahead of his like entourage, and he begins to work, and he's just a part of the city. And it says this is what he did while he was there. Every Sabbath, because every Sabbath he would go to the synagogue, he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade the Jews and the Greeks. And so you imagine, like, for the first little bit when he gets there, he's just kind of participating in the life of the city. He's working, he's going to synagogue, and he's arguing, he's reasoning with the Jews in the synagogue each Sabbath. But then there's a bit of a shift. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, these are two guys that travel with Paul, they're kind of Paul's entourage. Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. Now, this isn't the whole point of the sermon today, but just a little thing to point out. Do you notice Paul's clarity of what he's been called to do? The clarity and the focus that he has. Like, he's willing to make tents and to be an ordinary citizen for a little while, but when his guys show up, he knows what he's exclusively been called to do. He devotes himself exclusively to preaching and testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. So Paul goes into like focus mode. This is what I'm here to do. This is what God has called me to do. Do you know what that thing is? Do you know what the thing is that like I do all these things, like I'm a parent and I have this job and I volunteer here and I do, but like, do you know the thing that God built you to do? Do you know what your gift is? It's an important thing to think about. What is the thing that like I would leave everything else behind to do this one thing? This is the thing that I'm focused on. It's an important question to be able to answer. Continuing on in the story. But when they opposed Paul, meaning the Jews in the synagogue, and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest, and he said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and he went next door, like in your face, I'm going next door, you don't want me here. Next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue leader, so you imagine like the synagogue leader must have come from the synagogue and like went over to this guy's house next door, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. One night, the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. "Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, teaching them the word of God. Now, I said earlier, we're part of this revolution. We're part of this turning the world right side up. We're followers of Jesus. And we want to learn from these stories how to live today. I don't know about you, but when I read some stories like this, I think, well, that's a cool story. Like, good for Paul. Good for Paul. Like, I mean, Paul's doing his thing. He's making tents. He's preaching in synagogues. He's converting Gentiles. God's speaking to him in dreams. I mean, sounds like a cool life for Paul. But sometimes I struggle with stories like this after reading them for the first couple times anyways, to be like, what does this story have to do with me? Like, I don't have any synagogues that I'm going to preach at. And I mean, if Jesus shows up in a dream, I'll be happy to do with whatever he wants to like tell me in that dream. I'll be happy to do that, but it hasn't been happening like regularly anyways. And so I'm left with these passages thinking, what am I to do with a passage like this? Paul goes to the synagogue, they kick him out, they abuse him. So he goes next door and he begins preaching to the Gentiles. We get a picture of like maybe he was afraid and feeling kind of like defeated in the city. Maybe the Jews were after him. And so Jesus comes to him in a dream and speaks to him and encourages him. And so then he stays there for 1.5 years. And I'm left with kind of like, I wonder what to do with that. So like, I wonder, this is why Ken gave me this passage. Because I don't know what to do with this passage. No, I'm just kidding. But I left with a little bit of that. And I just say that because maybe you feel that way too. When you read the Bible, sometimes you're like, okay, I get that happened. Cool that happened. What do I do with it now? But the more that I thought about this passage, the more that I was reminded of a book that I read a number of years ago. And I think that the book and this passage, and you can apply it to lots of places in Scripture, I think actually go together really well. So I want to explain to you what this book is about, and then we'll apply it to this passage and what we can learn, I think, as followers of Jesus from this passage. But the book is called this, The Dip. I don't know if you can read this, but the subtitle is this, a little book that teaches you when to quit and when to stick. And it's by Seth Godin. Now, by no means am I saying like, you should go read this book. Like, it's not a Christian book. It's not about following Jesus, but there's lots of interesting ideas in it. And I want to pull out some of the best ones for us today. So you're going to hear me say lots of things. You're going to see Seth's name and some quotes that I'll pull up later. But I want to get this idea across. There's this idea of the dip. Now, what is this idea? The idea is that in order to do anything meaningful in the world, in order to be the best at something or to do something like amazing or to be wildly successful, in order to get up here, you have to go through a dip. And the dip is like the long, hard slog. It's the practice, it's the repetition, it's the getting up out of bed when you don't want to, it's the doing it when you don't want to. It's the hard slog, that's the dip. And basically says that in order to do anything great or meaningful in the world, it has kind of this arc to it. It kind of has this shape to it. That we begin, and it's kind of exciting, right? Beginning anything new is exciting. A new job, a new opportunity, a new sport, a new musical instrument. You're beginning something new and it's exciting and there's payoff. Like there's payoff right away because you learn something easy and then it's like, oh, I learned a new thing. This is really rewarding. And other people may look at you and they're like, good job. Good for you. You did good. That was you doing good. But eventually all of that wears off. And the beginner's luck, people saying nice things, you noticing that you're growing, and eventually you enter into this downward slope where nobody cares that you're doing a new thing anymore. And you can't really see how you're growing anymore. And there's no, like you're not getting the lucky breaks anymore now. It seems like everything is unlucky and it's just getting harder and harder. And he says the only way to get to the greatness, to doing something meaningful, purposeful in the world, is that you have to persevere through this dip. But here's the catch. Not every dip is a dip. Meaning not every dip is gonna go back up. Some dips are actually dead ends. Some dips are, it was going well at the beginning, but now it's kind of crashing and burning and it's just going to crash and burn and it's horrible and you need to get out now. Not everything is gonna, in the end, it's gonna end up great and you're gonna be so glad that you tried to do that and that you became a master at that. You will not be a master at everything that you try. You will not succeed in doing something meaningful in everything that you try. So sometimes the dip is a dip, meaning it's a dip and you will then persevere through the dip and you'll move on to doing something meaningful. But sometimes it's a dead end. And when it's a dead end, you need to quit. And so here's the thing that the book talks about. How do I become a person who is good at recognizing when it's a dip and I should stick through it, or when it's a dead end and I should quit? Which is why the subtitle of the book is a little book that teaches you when to quit. You quit when it's a dead end, and when to stick. You stick when it's a dip, because you stick and then you eventually see it through and you see the upside. Now, I think that you can apply this to the little story that we just saw from Paul a few minutes ago. That Paul, when he first gets to Corinth, what happens? He gets to the synagogue, and what do? They reject him. They're like, we're not interested. He even uses the word abuse, like they're abusive towards him. And what does Paul do? He recognizes this synagogue is a dead end, and I need to quit. And so he quits. He's like, I'm not going to the synagogue anymore. I'm gonna go to the Gentiles. I'm gonna go next door. I'm gonna preach over there. So Paul recognizes that was a dead end. But then as the story goes on, one of the insights that we get into the story, Jesus comes to Paul in a dream and he says, Paul, don't be afraid. Well, why would Jesus say don't be afraid? Must mean he was afraid. Jesus says, I am with you. What does that, must mean that Paul was feeling a bit abandoned. Jesus says, I have other people in this city Paul must have been feeling like, is anybody like paying attention? Like, is anybody gonna come to Jesus through my work here? And Jesus gives Paul this really specific kind of encouragement, which I think tells us what Paul was feeling. He was feeling the dip. So he goes to the synagogue and he quits, but then he's preaching to the rest of Corinth. And Jesus comes to him and says, I don't want you to quit on the rest of Corinth. Like, it was okay for you to quit on the synagogue, but I don't want you to quit on the rest of Corinth, because the rest of Corinth is actually gonna be a dip. And if you persevere through this, I'm gonna build a remarkable church here. And then what does Luke tell us? He tells us that Paul stayed there for 1.5 years more, persevering through the dip, building the church in Corinth. And I wonder if this is maybe one of the reasons why Luke includes this story for us to read. Not just so that we can go, oh, that happened to Paul there, but for us to be able to look at it and go, oh, this is what life feels like sometimes. Like, there's certain things that we're gonna try and we're gonna need to learn, like, I need to quit that thing. And there's other things that we're gonna try and they're gonna be hard, but we need to actually push through them. This is such an important lesson in life. Like, so many things follow this curve. You wanna learn a musical instrument. It begins and you're like, Mom, look, I can play like Mary Had a Little Lamb. And your mom's like, oh, that was so great. You're gonna be the best pianist ever. But eventually you just find yourself like at that keyboard and by yourself, no one cares anymore. And all you're like, you gotta practice chords and what are the other things? The scales. Like, nobody's going like, that's so amazing. And you don't feel like you're getting any better. And it's like, are you gonna push through the hard pain to learn this instrument? I felt this curve. I felt it in marriage. Maybe you felt it in marriage? Like, you get to know somebody. This person's the most amazing person I've ever met in my life. They're the most beautiful person I've ever met in my life. I can't believe that they're gonna marry me. My life is just gonna be so wonderful with them. And then you get married. And this has nothing, my marriage is fine, so you don't need to read into this. But eventually, when you're married for long enough, you get into a dip. And you're like, this person, they're starting to get a little wrinkly. This person, I mean, maybe my wife would think this is me. This person, they lost all their hair. I tell my boys all the time, I'm like, you gotta lock up a wife before you go bald, because you're gonna be just like your dad, you're gonna be bald. So before you're 25, find your wife. But eventually, like, you're like, this person's a little bit selfish. They're not as generous and kind all the time as I thought they were. And you got to decide, like, am I going to push through this to build a beautiful marriage, or am I going to quit on it? I learned this in playing sports, that like, I played quarterback in high school, and one of the things that you learn pretty quickly is like, a lot of people can throw a football. And so that's kind of like, this is really fun to like play out in the field with my friends and throw the football. But to be really good at quarterback is here and here. It actually has very little to do with your arm, because there's a ton of people that can throw, but there's not as many people that are smart enough to learn the plays and learn the defense. And there's not enough people that focus on their legs, which is actually the key to being a quarterback, is your footwork. And all that stuff, well, that's down here. That's like studying to play a sport. Oh, like you have a notebook in order to play a sport. You got to work on like footwork drills, like you're a dancer. Like, I thought I just want to be a quarterback, but you got to go through all that hard stuff in order to see it through to the other side. So many things in life have this curve, and it's such an important skill for us to learn, something for us to at least to recognize is there. Because the last thing that you want to do is be this person who all throughout life, you start new things and then they get hard and then you quit. And you start another new thing and it gets hard and then you quit. You know those people in your life. Maybe you feel like you've become someone like that. Like, all I ever do is just start new things and then I quit. You don't want to be that person who's just constantly quitting. But you also don't want to be the person who is like, I will persevere. I will never give up. And meanwhile, you're just marching into a dead end the whole time. Like, you will never see this. And everybody that you talk to in the dip, you're like, I'm just in a dip. And they're like, dude, you're not at a dip. You're at a dead end. You need to stop. You don't want to be that person either, who's just like blindly going in a direction that is actually a dead end. And so how can we learn from Paul? Specifically, maybe, how we can learn from Paul as followers of Jesus, or as people who want to be followers of Jesus. How can we learn how to recognize the dips from the dead ends? How can we get better at discerning these two things? Because discerning the dips from the dead ends, I mean, it applies to all kinds of places in life. And so first, let's talk about the dead ends. How do we recognize the dead ends, and how do we quit well? How do we be good at this? One of the most important ideas I found in this book was this distinction that Seth makes. He talks about strategic quitting versus reactive quitting. He says most of us in life reactively quit. Meaning we start new things and then we get into them, and then when they get hard, we're like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. This is uncomfortable. This is painful. Like I thought I was gonna start this new ministry and I thought people were gonna want to be a part of it, but now nobody wants to be a part of it and nobody wants to give any funding to it. So like, I'm just done. Like you just start something and then when it gets hard, you reactively quit. It's just a reaction. Versus strategically quitting. And what he says is that you want to be a strategic quitter. And this is what he means by that. You want to decide ahead of time, when is it that you will quit? So when you are lucid, when you are thinking clearly, when you can think logically and it's not emotional and it's not reactive and you're not panicking, you can say, when would it make sense for me to quit? So I'm going to start this new thing, but before I start it, how will I know when it's at a dead end? And maybe you need to actually like write that down so that when you get into the dip or the downward slope, you can look at it and go, you know what, 6 months ago when I started this, I said that if these things happen, that's a sign that this is a dead end, and those things are happening. So I think that this is a dead end. Or vice versa, when things get really hard and you're feeling like, I just want to give up, you could look at that list and you could realize, actually, none of these things have happened yet. So maybe there's actually more room. Maybe there is more flex here. Maybe there is actually a chance that this is a dip and is going to swing upwards. Now, I know what you maybe be thinking. If you're like a longtime churchgoer, you're like, Pete, come on, we started with the Bible. Now you're just giving us Seth Godin. Like, come on, get back to the Bible. Good thinking. That's where we're going to go. I think that this idea is actually an idea that Jesus gives us. I want to read for you a passage that we get from Matthew. And we get this passage, and the setup is that Jesus is going to send out his disciples. So he's sending out his guys for one of the first times to go preach the kingdom of God. And I want you to pay attention to what he says to them. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. What is Jesus doing here? He's sending out his disciples. And what is he telling them ahead of time? Guys, this is how you will know to strategically quit. You're gonna be going to all these new towns and villages and interacting with new people. And here's how you're gonna know. If you get to a place and they don't welcome you or listen to your words, Jesus is like, I give you permission to quit. I give you permission to shake the dust off your feet and get out of there, which is really interesting that Luke uses the same phraseology in how he describes what Paul does to the synagogue. It says he shook the dust off. He just shook it off. It's like this marrying of like Luke knows this story somehow, and he's like, for people that know this story, I'm gonna create a link. So they're like, oh, shake the dust off. I remember that's what our rabbi said. That's what Master Jesus taught us to do. Jesus gives his disciples this instruction to strategically quit. Otherwise, you're gonna go from house to house and you're gonna be like, I don't know, should we stay here, guys? I don't know, they didn't really wanna listen tonight. I don't really feel my peace. What do you guys think? I don't know. Like instead, we know that when this happens, it means it's time to move on. Jesus gives us permission to strategically quit rather than reactively quit. And so that's a little bit about how to kind of prepare for this whole quitting thing. It's something that you have to do ahead of time. And now here's some questions that Seth asks in his book that I think are really helpful. If you're thinking about like, is this a dead end or is this a dip? He says, ask this question, am I panicking? And this is something that Seth writes in the book. Never quit something with great long-term potential just because you can't deal with the stress of the moment. So you could ask yourself a question like, if you're in that downward slope right now, just, am I panicking? Am I panicking right now? Because maybe I just need to like take a breath. Maybe I need to go to bed. Maybe I need to get a good meal. And I need to think this through before I reactively quit. Another question, he says, am I being rejected by everyone or just some people? Am I being rejected by everyone or just some people? Now in his language, he talks about the market. And he's like, if you try to like sell to this part of the market, they may say no, but it doesn't mean that it's a no for the whole world. And so you got to keep knocking on doors and keep peddling your product. But I think Paul does the same thing. Is he being rejected by everyone in Corinth? No, he's being rejected by the Jews in the synagogue. And so what does he do? He just goes next door and he finds people there that are wanting to be baptized and become followers of Jesus. So ask yourself, am I being rejected by everyone? Like, is this just a bad idea universally? I have learned this is not going to work. Or is it just some people that have said no? You know, you've probably heard many stories about like famous authors, and it always has the story about like, I wrote this book that became a bestseller, but what did they have to do? They had to submit it to like 30 different publishers, and they had to get 29 different no's before they got their one yes, and then the thing succeeded. Basically, it's a story of them going through this dip and them saying, this isn't a dead end yet. It's not a dead end until I've given this to every publisher on the planet. Then I can say it's a dead end, and I can move on to the next thing. One last question that we could ask ourselves if we're looking at something that might be a dead end. Am I avoiding the remarkable as a way of quitting without quitting? Am I avoiding the remarkable, doing something meaningful, doing something like amazing in the world, starting a revolution as a way of quitting without quitting? Another way that I would phrase this question would be, am I settling? Am I in a dip? And instead of labeling it, this is a dead end, I'm just gonna settle here. And I'm gonna pretend like it's not a dip. I'm gonna pretend like everything's fine. Everything's fine. If it's a little broken, I'm a little messed up. This is not really a healthy rhythm in my life, but I'm just gonna settle here. And then I won't actually have to quit this thing and start something new and try for the remarkable. Try to do something amazing with the gifts and the spirit that God has placed inside of me. Am I avoiding the remarkable as a way of quitting without quitting? So those are a few words about the dead end. Now I want to go back and talk about the dip. How can we be people who are more likely to persevere through the dip? Who are more likely to recognize the dip and say, I'm going to persevere, I'm going to get through this so that I can do something meaningful and remarkable in the world. I've got one thing that I want to talk about you can do before, so you can do it here. And I've got 3 things that I want to talk about that you can do when you're in the dip. So if you're here and you're like looking at the whole thing, this is what you should do. You should ask yourself the question, is it going to be worth the dip? Is whatever I'm dreaming of getting to up here, is it going to be worth going through whatever this is? And do I even understand that exists? Because everything meaningful has a dip. Everything meaningful has a cost associated with it. So is it gonna be worth it? And do I have the resources? Do I have what it takes to get through the dip? These are questions that we can ask at this point of the journey. Before we even begin, we can look at that dip, we can look at the reward, and we can go, I don't know, I don't think I'm the kind of person. I'm not like, you wanna learn how to play an instrument? Are you disciplined? Oh, you're not disciplined. Well, just give up on instruments. It's not gonna be for you. You gotta look at the cost and be like, am I gonna be able to pay this? And again, I think Jesus teaches us the same thing. Jesus says this to a group of followers in Luke chapter 14. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Jesus, in this passage, he's setting it up to be like, you wanna be my disciple? You see greatness, you're seeing the end. Well, let me tell you about the dip first. Let me describe the dip for you before you just think like it's all gonna be gravy and we're just gonna rush to the other side. Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. This has to do with sacrifice that leads to suffering. Anybody not interested in sacrifice and suffering? You're not gonna make it through the dip. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? It's like, imagine you want to build a tower. You want to get to the high side after the dip. You want that. Wouldn't just any logical person sit down first and estimate, do I have enough money to complete this? Am I the kind of person who could do this? Is it gonna be worth it to me when I'm in the dip to look up and say, that's gonna be worth it to stay here? Isn't that just Jesus is like, isn't that just what reasonable people would do? For if you lay the foundation, you get started, and you're not able to finish it, you get stuck in the dip, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. This person started something new and got stuck in the dip. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he'll send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Jesus is saying the same thing. You envision kingdom greatness, doing meaningful, amazing things in the world. And we're standing right here with Jesus. And he's like, yep, the kingdom's gonna be great. You're gonna wanna be a part of it. But there's a dip to get there. And it means like forsaking your parents, saying like there's now a higher allegiance that I have above my own family. I'm joining a new family. It means picking up your cross, saying, I will sacrifice, I will give, I will treat all of my possessions as if they are not my own. Are you willing? Because you see the great tower, but before you go start building the great tower, Jesus is like, just sit down and think about what it's gonna cost to build that tower. So that's step one. If you wanna be a person who gets through the dip, think about if this dip is worth it to you before you begin. And then some ideas for when you're in the dip. So that was about what we can do when we're before it. What do I do when I'm in the dip? What do I do? Well, again, I think this story is helpful. I think this story, the fact that Luke gives us this story is helpful, that we get a picture of Paul being a little bit dejected. It doesn't say that in the text, but based on what Jesus says to him, I picture Paul, I picture him staying up late. And he's just like, man, I the Jews are trying to kill me. There's a couple people that followed you, Jesus, but this is a big city and I don't feel safe here and I haven't heard from you for a while. And so I just feel like I want to give up. And Luke gives us this story, I think, to normalize that feeling. To normalize, the dip is normal. It's a normal part of following Jesus. I heard a podcast this week and the guy being interviewed was a comedic performer. And he was talking about how he had all of these panic attacks, and that he would actually have panic attacks on stage. And because he had experienced success from a young age, he thought that it was really unique to him and that nobody else would understand it. And so for a long time, he kept it secret and he didn't tell anybody. And it just kept getting worse and worse, but he just felt like nobody else is gonna understand this. Nobody else knows what it's like to have these panic attacks on stage. And then eventually he reached a breaking point and he started to share. And what he found as he started to share is that he wasn't the only person that experienced this. And that actually experiencing this kind of panic attacks just in life in general, and even on stage from performers, this was actually more normative than he could have ever imagined. And so what he said in the interview, I thought it was so profound. He said, that's where the strength was. I thought the strength was in thinking I'm unique. I'm the only one who's going to go through this. I thought that's where the strength was, but the strength was actually found as I realized, no, there's a whole collection of people and there's a tribe of people that I can journey with and I can share my experience with and they can share theirs with me. That's where the strength came from. And so I wonder if you're a person who's in the dip right now, wondering is this a dead end? I don't know if I have what it takes to get back up the mountain. If that's you right now, maybe this story in just the simplest ways for you to remind you, yeah, you're in a dip. You feel like you want to give up. You feel like you're going to be crushed. That's very normal. We've all felt that. And anybody who has done anything meaningful or remarkable or great in the world has felt this way. So you are not alone. And maybe that's enough to help you to keep going. Another thing, if you're in the dip, maybe you don't have to quit on the whole project, but maybe you can quit on a particular method or strategy that you're employing right now. You're like, I want to do it this way, and this way is not working. But you can change the method without changing the overall mission. I think Paul gives us a picture of this in this story. He's like, I want to reach the city of Corinth. He goes, the synagogue, that's not working. Okay, new strategy, new method. I'm going to go to the Gentiles. I'm going to preach to them. Maybe whatever you're doing, maybe whatever you're caught up in, whatever this curve is for you, you don't have to quit the whole thing. You just have to quit how you're doing it. Particularly, maybe you're saying Pete, I'm in a marriage and I feel like I'm down here. Or I feel like my relationship with my kids is right here. Are you telling me that I can just quit? No, I'm not telling you that you can quit. What I'm telling you is that if this is gonna be a dip for you, that you've gotta change how you're doing things. Like you're in a dip in your marriage, change how you're operating. Maybe you don't pray with your wife. Maybe you're not vulnerable with your wife. Maybe you don't sit down after dinner and talk to her. Maybe there's some simple tweaks that you need to add. And so you're gonna quit all the things that aren't working and you're gonna start doing some things that are working so that you can get through this dip in your marriage. Maybe you don't have to quit the whole thing. You just need to change the strategy. Seth says this in the book, that as he studied people that had done remarkable, amazing things in the world, that he found that when they reached the dip, they didn't just wait. The worst thing you can do in the dip is just wait. I'm just gonna wait it out. This will go away eventually. Don't wait. Change your strategy. Start tweaking the dials. Start making changes in your life to get out of the dip. And then lastly, if you're in the dip, are you listening for the voice of Jesus? Are you listening for God's voice to speak to you? I love the words that Jesus speaks to Paul, and I want to read them again because these might be words that you need to hear. And maybe the reason why Luke records them for us is because he knew that like each one of us weren't going to get the vision of Jesus and him coming to us at night, and we're going to hear him audibly. But Luke's like, I want every believer, I want everyone who ever follows Jesus to hear these words at some point in their life. So I'm going to record them so that you can hear them today in 2021, and maybe they'll help get you through the dip. Jesus says to Paul, do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. And in that part, you can just put in whatever the thing is that you're doing. Do not be afraid. Keep on building that business. Keep on pushing forward with that new ministry. Keep on believing that this marriage can work. Keep on believing that reconciliation with your kids can happen. Do not be afraid. Keep on going through the dip. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack you and harm you, because I have many people in this city. You know, I've found as a pastor that when one of the most popular questions has to do with this, discerning. What am I supposed to do next in life? Am I supposed to quit something? Am I supposed to do something new? And one of the things that I say consistently is that if God has a specific plan for you, like a specific, I want you to do this, then he will speak clearly. And so all you have to do is make sure that you're listening. So are you listening? If you're in the dip right now and you're not sure, like, is this a dead end or is this a dip? Should I quit or should I keep going? Are you listening? Because if you're listening and you can say like, you know what, I've been listening. Maybe you could even say like, I fasted. Like I fasted and prayed and I listened for his voice and you didn't hear anything. Well, then it's probably not like a make or break for the whole universe on which one of the things that you choose. Maybe you just need to use wisdom and make the best choice that you can. But if you're really worried that like, I don't want to miss God's plan for my life, then spend time listening. And if it really matters, if God has like I really want it to be this, and you're listening, I believe that he will speak clearly to you. Maybe not in a vision, maybe not in a dream, and speak something right into your ear, maybe through a friend, maybe through an inner peace, but I believe that he'll make it clear to you. How to know when to quit and when to stick. This is such an important skill for us to have in life. Particularly, maybe you're already thinking this, particularly in the season that hopefully we are about to head into, right? The season, what season are we hopefully about to enter into? Non-COVID season, right? Hopefully we are about to get out of this pandemic season and we're gonna get back to not wearing masks and being able to be in rooms together. I don't want to say normal because maybe it will be a new normal, all those phrases that you're sick of hearing. Pivot! We're about to enter into this new season. And maybe this is something that you need to reflect on before you rush back to all the things that you used to do. Maybe you need to spend some time with this idea and think, Jesus, is there anything that I need to quit? Is there anything that I used to do a year and a half ago that you don't want me running back to because it's a dead end? Is there anything that I am like just sitting in the dip with and I have settled and I have basically quit on quitting? And so I'm just trying to make it seem like, oh, this is fine. But Jesus is telling you, I want you to quit that because I have something else bigger for you to do. I have something that I built you to do. And is there anything maybe that you don't feel like you have the energy to do? You can't imagine how you're gonna go back to that thing and do that job again the way that you used to do it. And you're like, oh, the last thing I wanna do is for this to end and me go back to normal. Well, then this is the time where you need to spend time thinking about how am I going to do it differently? Because I want to get out of the dip and I want to climb the mountain. But if I keep doing things the way that I was, I'm never going to get out of the dip. And so maybe you need to spend some time with a pencil and a piece of paper and thinking like, how did I used to do it? How am I going to do it differently when we go back? And lastly, And this might be the most important part of the whole thing, or at least the key to this whole part of going through the dip, especially when it comes to being followers of Jesus and kind of like the spiritual side of doing things with God in the world. It's to realize that in order to make it through those dips, we need God to carry us through those dips. There's certain dips that we can get through on our own strength. There's certain dips that we can get through and we can just like muster up the effort that is needed to make them happen. But to do the things that are like really remarkable, the things that lead to a revolution, to the turning of the world right side up, we need God to show up and to carry us through those dips. And so I want to read for you the last part of the story that I've saved up until now this morning. So you get this picture. Paul goes to Corinth. He's rejected in the synagogue. He starts to build up the church in Corinth with the Gentiles. And then after a year and a half, this happens. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things. And so he drove them off. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatever. Now, Paul is arrested, he's accused, he's brought before this guy, and you might imagine that he's feeling like, oh man, this is hard. Like it's just hard thing after hard thing keeps happening to him in this story, especially as we go on through the rest of Acts. I wonder what he was thinking. He must be thinking like, what am I gonna say? Okay, how am I gonna get out of this one? What does God want me to say? Like that's what you'd be thinking, right? If you got arrested and charged for being a Christian, you'd be thinking like, okay, I gotta say the right thing. So you imagine Paul's like, okay, what am I gonna say? And the best part of this story is he doesn't have to say anything. He never has to speak. It's like he was just about to speak. And then Gallio, the proconsul, he comes in and he's like, listen, I have already made up my mind about this. Like, why do I care about any of this? Which to me is a picture of God carrying Paul through this dip. He's like, Paul, you've been working so hard and I can see how drained and exhausted and frustrated you are. So in this moment, you don't have to speak. You don't have to find the right words. I will be there for you and I'll carry you through this moment. And I think that when we are really up to the things of Jesus in this world, when we are truly spirit-filled and on mission for him, I think that we'll find that this happens to us over and over. That like, I was so afraid of that moment. I had no idea how we were gonna get through that. I didn't know how we were gonna get out of this one. And time again, we look back and we just go, God just carried us through the whole time. He had his arms around us. He was carrying us in the boat through the storm the whole time. And so may you, my brothers and sisters, know when to quit and when to stick. And when things get particularly frustrating and painful and you feel the most exhausted, may you be reminded that God has promised to be with you, to carry you, and to be for you. Would you pray with me? God, making decisions is so difficult. And so would you help us? Help us to, first of all, be wise. Help us to slow down and not to be reactionary and not to make decisions because we're panicked. Jesus, would you give us your wisdom? Would you help us to hear your voice? Would you speak clearly, and would you create spaces where we have time alone in silence so that we can hear your voice? And would you give us power, the power that we need to get through, the power that we need from your Spirit to do the things that you're calling us to do in the world? And God, for anybody who feels like they're not sure if they should quit or not, would you give them a sense of peace about what they're supposed to do next, whether they are at a dead end or in a dip? And God, for anybody who is in a dip that is thinking about quitting, but they need to persevere, would you speak to them and would you give them the strength that they need? Because we can't do any good thing without you. We ask all these things in Jesus' strong, resurrected name. Amen.